I woke up to the weight of a hand on my body. For a split second, I didn't react. My mind, still foggy from sleep, automatically assumed it was my husband. The warmth of another person, the faint scent of cologne lingering in the air, it all felt familiar. Safe. But then the hand moved. Not in the way my husband's did. This touch was hesitant, deliberate. Testing. Almost as if whoever it belonged to was waiting for me to stir. A strange tension settled in my chest. My body, still caught between sleep and wakefulness, was slow to process what was happening. My heart, however, reacted immediately, picking up pace, thudding against my ribs in a way that warned me something was wrong. My husband wasn't here. That realization sent a sharp jolt through me, snapping me out of my groggy state. I sucked in a breath, my body going rigid as my brain finally caught up to the moment. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining things. Someone was touching me. Panic and confusion tangled in my chest as I forced my eyes open. At first, all I could make out was the dim light seeping through the blinds, casting soft lines across the room. The world was still quiet, the house still wrapped in that early morning hush before anyone else woke up. Except, I wasn't alone. Slowly, I turned my head. And that's when I saw him. Levi Bean. My husband's stepfather. He was sitting on the edge of my bed, his face partially shadowed, his hand still resting on me as if he hadn't yet decided whether to move it. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a flicker of hesitation. A silent question. Everything inside me screamed that this wasn't right. That I should say something, push him away, demand to know what the hell he was doing in my room, touching me. But I didn't. I couldn't. This not a love story. If you are expecting one, then now is the right time to stop watching. But if you stay, I promise it will be worth your while. Before I could even force a single word out, my gaze shifted past him. And there, standing in the doorway, was Genesis Hansen, my husband's stepmother. She wasn't alarmed. She wasn't shocked. She was just watching. Her expression unreadable. Her posture too still. Like she had been standing there long enough to take it all in, and instead of stopping it, she was simply letting it unfold. The air in the room thickened, pressing down on my chest. My thoughts scrambled to make sense of what was happening, to piece together how we had gotten here. How did this happen? How did I let it happen? The weight of Levi's hand suddenly disappeared from my body, but he didn't move away. He just sat there, watching me in the dim light. Waiting. For what, I didn't know. I was breathing too fast, my skin burning from where he had touched me, my heart pounding so hard I swore it might crack open my ribs. A storm of emotion surged through me, shock, disbelief, panic. And buried deep beneath them, something darker. Something I didn't want to name. I should have stopped this. I should have screamed, pushed him away, told Genesis to get out, and demanded to know why she was standing there, staring at me like she already knew exactly what was running through my mind. But I didn't. I just lay there, my breath shallow, my hands clenched into the sheets, feeling the weight of both their gazes pressing down on me. And at that moment, I knew. Everything was about to change. Forever. The lockdown started as an inconvenience and then quickly became a prison. What was supposed to be a few weeks of staying home turned into months of suffocating routine, trapped in a house that felt smaller with each passing day. At first, there was a sense of novelty, lazy mornings, long breakfasts, and the illusion that this was just an extended break from real life. My husband, Aaron Montgomery, and I tried to make the best of it. We cooked meals together, binge-watched shows we had ignored for years, and even talked more than usual. But as the weeks stretched into months, the cracks in our marriage, the ones we had ignored for so long, started to show. Aaron worked remotely, burying himself in conference calls and emails, while I drifted through the house like a ghost. We had once found comfort in each other's presence, but now, we felt like strangers sharing a space out of obligation. The silence between us grew, filling the gaps where laughter and conversation used to live. I would wake up early, make coffee, and sit in the kitchen waiting for him to join me. Sometimes he did, but most mornings, he stayed in bed until his first meeting. When we did talk, it was about practical things, the groceries, the bills, the news updates that seemed to get worse every day. Gone were the deep conversations, the teasing, the effortless intimacy we once had. And the sex? That had faded into something occasional, almost mechanical, when it did happen at all. It didn't help that we weren't alone. When Aaron's mother, Evangeline Ollie, fell and broke her hip right before the lockdown, we agreed that she and her husband, Levi Bean, would stay with us. It made sense, Levi could take care of her, and we wouldn't have to worry about them being alone. What we didn't realize was how much their presence would change the dynamic of our home. Our house, once a private space, now felt like a shared lodging. Evangeline took over the living room, spending most of her time in a recliner with her leg elevated, while Levi moved around the house as if he had lived there forever. He was helpful, too helpful. Fixing things, cleaning up, making himself comfortable in ways that blurred the line between guest and resident. And then there was Genesis Hansen, Aaron's stepmother, who visited frequently to check on Evangeline. Her presence was another layer of tension in a house already bursting with unspoken words. Days bled into each other. The same routines, the same conversations, the same frustrations. I felt invisible. Unnoticed. I wasn't working, contributing, or doing anything that made me feel like myself. It was as if I had become just another part of the furniture, something to be stepped around and ignored. Levi, however, noticed me. It started with small things, him bringing me a cup of coffee before I even asked, his lingering glances when he thought I wasn't paying attention, the way he always seemed to be around when Aaron was too busy to care. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. He was just being polite, just trying to help. But as time went on, the energy between us shifted. There was an awareness, an unspoken something that neither of us acknowledged but both of us felt. And then there was Genesis. Unlike Evangeline, who was always occupied with her pain and recovery, Genesis was different. She watched. She listened. And sometimes, when we were alone, she would say things that made my stomach flip in ways I couldn't explain. "You must feel lonely in this house," she had said once, her voice too soft, too knowing. I had laughed it off, pretending I didn't understand what she meant. But I did. And I hated how right she was. The days dragged on, each one an echo of the last. The tension in my marriage grew thicker, the distance between Aaron and me stretching wider. I told myself that this was just a phase, that when the world reopened, so would we. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Then, one morning, everything changed. It started with small things, little moments that seemed harmless at first. A glance held a second too long. A brush of fingers when passing a plate at dinner. A quiet smile was shared across the room when no one else was looking. The kind of things you could dismiss if you wanted to. And at first, I did. But temptation is a funny thing. It doesn't come crashing in all at once. It creeps up on you, like a slow, rolling fog. You don't realize you're in the thick of it until you can't see your way out. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Levi. The others were either napping or buried in their own routines. I was making tea, my back turned to him when I felt him step closer than he needed to. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "Need help with that?" I turned, finding him right there, so close that I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, something woodsy and rich. My breath hitched. I knew this was dangerous, but I didn't move away. Instead, I held his gaze. My heart pounded against my ribs. "I think I've got it," I murmured. He didn't move. Neither did I. The silence stretched between us, thick with something I wasn't ready to name. His hand brushed my wrist, just a ghost of a touch, fleeting and deliberate. My skin burned where he touched me. And then it was over. He stepped back as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something irreversible. From that moment on, everything changed. I found myself hyper-aware of his presence. The way he moved, the way he looked at me when he thought no one was watching. I knew I should stop this before it went too far. But something was thrilling about it, the secrecy, the silent challenge we were playing with. A part of me wanted to see how far we could push it. And then I pushed too far. It happened late one night. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, pretending not to wait for him. But when he walked in and sat beside me, my entire body responded. The air between us was charged, electric. We sat in silence for a long time, the tension building with every passing second. Then, without a word, he reached out and brushed a stray hair from my face. It was such a simple gesture, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to face him, my breath unsteady. "We shouldn't do this," I whispered. "I know." Neither of us moved. Then his hand was on my thigh, fingers pressing into the fabric of my shorts. My body betrayed me, leaning into the touch I knew I should pull away from. My lips parted, and a shaky exhale escaped as he leaned in closer, his breath warm against my skin. And then we crossed the line. I don't know who moved first, but suddenly his lips were on mine, his hands pulling me closer. The guilt was immediate, but it wasn't enough to stop me. It was fast, desperate, the culmination of every stolen glance and unspoken desire we had let build between us. When it was over, we sat there in stunned silence, our breathing ragged. I should have felt nothing but shame. But all I could think about was how much I wanted more. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. It all came to a head the night everything exploded into chaos. The moment I woke up to find Levi and Genesis in my room, my body had reacted before my mind could catch up. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. Every moment before this had been leading to it. The stolen glances, the whispered words, the way I had let myself slide further and further down a path I couldn't turn back from. But at that moment, as I lay there with their hands on me, all I could think about was how badly I wanted it. The weight of Levi's touch. The soft, teasing brush of Genesis's lips against my skin. The heat, the intensity, the sheer recklessness of it all. I should have stopped it. I should have screamed, pushed them away, or done anything but surrender. But I didn't. Instead, I let myself fall. I let desire win over reason. I let my body take control where my mind had failed me. At that moment, there was no room for guilt or hesitation. Only pleasure. Only the forbidden thrill of knowing this was so wrong, and craving it anyway. When it was over, the reality of what I had done came crashing in like a tidal wave. My heart pounded, my body trembling with the aftershocks of what had just happened. I couldn't look at them. I couldn't look at myself. But the worst part? I knew it wouldn't be the last time. Because now that we had crossed that line, there was no turning back. The weight of the night before clung to me like a second skin, suffocating yet thrilling all at once. I lay in bed, my body still sensitive, still remembering. The room was dark, the silence around me deafening, save for the sound of my breathing, uneven, erratic. My mind raced, reliving every moment in vivid detail. I had always assumed betrayal would feel like a knife to the gut, sharp and immediate. But this? This was something else entirely. It was slow, creeping, intoxicating. A dangerous high that left me craving more, even as shame gnawed at the edges of my mind. I turned onto my side, burying my face into the pillow, inhaling the lingering scent of what had happened. The guilt was there, whispering in the back of my mind, but it wasn't loud enough to drown out the pulse of something else, something darker, something undeniably thrilling. I knew this wasn't just a one-time thing. The seal had been broken, and there was no going back now. The morning after was a strange mix of tension and unspoken understanding. I sat at the dining table, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly, my mind a chaotic mess of emotions. Across from me, Levi and Genesis sat, their presence both magnetic and suffocating. Levi met my eyes briefly before looking away, his expression unreadable. Genesis, on the other hand, offered a small, knowing smile as if she already understood what was running through my head. My stomach tightened. "You're quiet this morning," she mused, sipping her tea. I forced a chuckle, hoping my voice didn't betray me. "Didn't sleep well." Levi cleared his throat, his grip tightening around his mug. "Yeah. Long night." The way he said it made my pulse quicken. My gaze flickered to him, catching the ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. "And the worst part?" "I liked it." Genesis stretched, her robe slipping just enough to reveal the curve of her collarbone. "We should do something today. Get out of the house for a bit." I nodded, forcing myself to focus. "Yeah. That sounds good." But even as I said it, I knew my thoughts were already elsewhere. Caught between guilt and desire, between the life I had built and the temptation I had willingly succumbed to. That night, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. My skin still bore the marks of what had happened, the light bruises on my hips, the faint redness where hands had gripped too tightly. I traced the outlines with my fingers, shivering at the memory. I should have felt disgusted. I should have been drowning in remorse. Instead, all I could think about was how badly I wanted it to happen again. A soft knock at the door made me jump. My breath hitched. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Levi stood there, his eyes dark, intense. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The air between us was thick, heavy with everything unspoken. My heart pounded against my ribs. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. "Lied." "Yeah." His gaze dropped to my lips, and for a moment, I thought he was going to walk away. But then he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I should have stopped him. I should have walked away. But I didn't. The days blurred into one another, each moment more reckless than the last. What had started as a single night of betrayal had spiraled into something unstoppable. Every stolen glance, every brush of skin, every whispered promise behind closed doors, it all added fuel to a fire that couldn't be extinguished. And the worst part? I didn't want it to stop. Late one evening, as I sat curled up on the couch, Genesis walked in and sat beside me. She was quiet for a moment, then turned to me with a knowing look. "I see the way you look at him," she said softly. My breath caught in my throat. "I don't," she laughed, cutting me off. "Don't lie to me, Amy. I'm not stupid." I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. "Genesis, she reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. Her touch was featherlight, her gaze piercing. "I'm not mad," she whispered. "I just want to know one thing." I nodded, my throat dry. "What?" Her lips curved into a slow, wicked smile. "Did you like it?" I couldn't breathe. Because I knew the answer. And so did she. By the time the weight of my choices truly sank in, it was too late. The damage had been done, the line had been obliterated beyond repair. There was no undoing what had happened. No erasing the nights spent tangled in sheets that weren't meant to be shared. The only question left was whether I could live with myself. And deep down, I already knew the answer. Because despite everything, despite the guilt, the shame, the knowledge that I had destroyed something sacred, I still wanted more. The weight of what had happened sat heavily on my chest. Every interaction, every shared glance across the room, carried an unspoken truth. I wasn't the same person I had been before that moment, and I knew, no matter how much I tried, I couldn't erase what had happened. I had crossed a boundary I never thought I would, and now, I was left to deal with the consequences. At first, I tried to push it to the back of my mind. I told myself it was a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment fueled by months of isolation, emotional neglect, and the suffocating silence of lockdown. But ignoring it didn't make it disappear. If anything, it made the guilt fester, turning into a dull ache that followed me everywhere. I started to notice changes in myself. I was hyper-aware of every word my husband spoke, every question he asked, every glance he threw in my direction. Did he know? Could he sense the shift in me? I found myself avoiding him, fearful that if I looked into his eyes for too long, he'd see straight through me. The more I tried to act normal, the more I felt like an imposter in my own marriage. The emotional toll was unbearable. My heart raced every time I was in the same room as Levi and Genesis. Were they feeling the same suffocating guilt? Or were they simply carrying on as if nothing had happened? I studied their movements, their expressions, searching for any sign that they, too, were struggling under the weight of what we had done. Levi was unreadable. He continued his daily routines, never faltering, never giving anything away. He spoke to me as he always had, with the same measured calmness. But something had changed. There was a restraint in his tone, a carefulness in his words, as if he knew that any misstep could unravel everything. Genesis, on the other hand, was different. She avoided me at first, finding reasons to leave the room whenever I entered. But then, gradually, she did the opposite, talking to me more than usual, making a point to engage in small talk, as if overcompensating for the silence that had existed between us. It was clear she was struggling just as much as I was. I started questioning everything. What did this mean for my marriage? Could I go on pretending like nothing had happened? Was this a one-time mistake, or was it the start of something that would spiral further out of control? One evening, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt my husband shift beside me. He let out a sigh, one that was deep and tired. I turned my head slightly, watching the outline of his face in the dim light of the room. He looked worn out, burdened by something I couldn't quite place. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly. He hesitated before answering. "I don't know," he admitted. "Something feels off." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he repeated, rubbing a hand over his face. "I just feel like you've been distant. Like we're not us anymore." The words cut through me. He was right. We weren't us anymore. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to break down and confess, to ask for forgiveness, to explain how I had let myself get to this point. But I couldn't. The fear of losing him, of destroying everything we had built, paralyzed me. Instead, I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his. "I don't want to feel like this," I whispered. "I want us to be okay." He squeezed my hand. "Then let's fix it." The following days were a blur of emotions, guilt, shame, self-reflection. I needed to understand why I had allowed myself to go down this path. Was it purely the isolation? Was it the emotional neglect I felt in my marriage? Or was there something deeper, something unresolved within me that had been waiting for an opportunity to surface? I started paying attention to my marriage in ways I hadn't before. I noticed how little we truly talked anymore, how we had let routine replace intimacy. The lockdown had exposed every crack in our relationship, forcing me to see just how much we had drifted apart. I also started paying attention to myself. What was I searching for that led me to cross that line? Was it excitement? Validation? The feeling of being wanted in a way I hadn't felt in so long? The more I reflected, the more I realized how lost I had become. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped recognizing myself. I had let loneliness and emotional neglect guide my decisions, leading me to a place I never thought I would end up. I had two choices: I could continue pretending, burying the truth and hoping it never came to light, or I could face it head-on, no matter how painful. The weight of my choices was unbearable, but one thing was clear: I couldn't stay in limbo forever. Something had to change. The weight of my actions settled over me like a heavy fog, refusing to lift no matter how much I tried to push forward. The secrecy, the thrill, the reckless indulgence, it had all come at a cost. Now, standing in the aftermath, I found myself trapped between the life I had built and the choices that threatened to tear it apart. Every glance from my husband felt like an accusation, even when he knew nothing. I couldn't meet his eyes without feeling the burn of my own shame. My interactions with Levi and Genesis had become strained. What once carried an intoxicating sense of danger now felt suffocating. I noticed the subtle changes in our dynamics. The avoidance. The tension. The stolen looks, no longer of excitement but of silent acknowledgement of what we had done. Guilt gnawed at me. I tried to justify my actions. Was it the isolation of the lockdown? The emotional distance in my marriage? The loneliness? But no reasoning could erase the truth. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Have you ever made a choice you couldn't take back? One that haunted you, no matter how much you tried to push it away? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? I told myself I could move forward and pretend nothing had happened. But secrets have a way of festering. I found myself growing paranoid, hyper-aware of my words and actions. Every offhand comment from my husband sent a shiver down my spine, making me wonder if he suspected something. Then came the slip-ups. A nervous laugh at the wrong moment. A hesitation when speaking about a night I should have had no trouble recalling. My husband was perceptive, and though he didn't press immediately, I could feel the weight of his growing suspicion. At what point does hiding the truth become worse than the truth itself? Would you choose silence, or would you confess? I faced a choice: confess and risk shattering everything, or continue to bury the truth beneath layers of deception. The thought of losing my husband, of breaking our family apart, was unbearable. But living under the weight of my actions, carrying this secret in every interaction, was equally crushing. I considered talking to Genesis. She had always been composed, careful. Maybe she had a plan, maybe she could help me figure out a way to move past this. But deep down, I knew there was no easy way out. The confrontation, the breaking point, came one evening when my husband found me lost in thought, staring at nothing. "Amy, is something wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle yet firm. I hesitated, my heart hammering. This was it, the moment I had feared. I could continue pretending or finally face the consequences of my choices. I swallowed hard. "I need to tell you something." His expression shifted, concern etched into his features. "Okay," the words lodged in my throat. I had rehearsed 1,000 ways to say it, but nothing felt right. And then, as if sensing the weight of what was coming, his face darkened. "Is there someone else?" I flinched. The directness of the question sent a chill through me. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no. But I had already gone too far. "It's complicated," I whispered. His jaw clenched. Complicated? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. My mind raced, scrambling for a way to soften the blow. But there was no softening this. No easy way out. If you were in my husband's position, would you want the truth no matter how painful? Or would ignorance be a kinder option? The days that followed were a blur of pain, anger, and regret. My husband withdrew, his presence in the house a ghost of what it once was. He didn't yell. He didn't explode in rage. Instead, he retreated into himself, leaving me to drown in my own remorse. Genesis and Levi kept their distance, and for the first time I truly felt alone. I had thought the act itself was the hardest part, the moment of betrayal. But I was wrong. The hardest part was living with it. Knowing that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same. If you could go back in time and undo one mistake, would you? Or do you believe every choice, even the painful ones, shapes who we are meant to be? As time passed, I realized I had a choice to make. I could let this mistake define me, let it consume my marriage, or I could fight to salvage what was left. But could my husband ever forgive me? Could I forgive myself? I didn't have the answers yet. But I knew one thing for certain: this was my reckoning. Whatever came next, I had to face it head-on. So, what would you do if you were me? Would you fight to rebuild? Or walk away and start anew?